All right, it looks like attendees have been admitted, so we're going to go ahead and get started for the evening. Welcome, everyone. You're at the February cycle meeting of Manhattan Community Board 5's Transportation Environment Committee. I'm the chair of the committee, EJ Kalifarsky. I'm here with my vice chair, Sam Levy. We have 4 items on our agenda this evening, 3 requests and 1 presentation. We will go ahead and get started. We'll go ahead and get started hearing these requests. As far as the 3 requests on our agenda evening tonight, which we'll tackle first, 1 is a requested no parking sign, and 2 are sightseeing bus stop requests. These 3 requests have all theoretically been seen by DOT already and are coming to us as DOT recommendations. However, at the top, I want to talk a little bit about how we're planning to tweak our assessment process of these requests this month. We know from past experience that this process does not provide us with the kind of information from DOT that we would kind of consider necessary to fully approve or disapprove these applications from a community perspective. On the no parking sign, we actually have no artifact or proposal on paper from DOT to assess, just the type of sign that DOT told the requester to ask us for. As far as the bus stops go, we have a form letter from DOT, which actually incorrectly calls these intercity buses instead of sightseeing buses. It provides some pro forma information like the location, but as we've seen in past months, these letters don't include information about, for example, other locations that the applicant asked for, or how DOT arrived at the specific location they're recommending over the other ones that the requester requested. Just some kind of general information about the recommended spot. So we lack a lot of context about why this spot as opposed to others. What we've discovered in the past is that this lack of contextual information makes it really difficult for us to understand, like I said, why the location was picked over others, and particularly to for our part as a community to sometimes recommend alternatives. We don't really end up with enough information from DOT to support or deny a full proposal, because we're not getting a solid proposal, or we don't have the research or reasoning that went behind DOT's choice of a location, or the specific signs, some of the specifics that are being requested. We simply don't get enough information to fully support or deny an application in this way. We also, for what it's worth, don't have any criteria with which to understand how or when our recommendation will be listened to or taken seriously by DOT. For example, in December, we provided considerable rationale for why we believed a proposed location for a big bus tours bus stop on 7th Avenue between 53rd and 54th Streets, why we believed that was a very bad location, and the community came out in force and we adopted a resolution saying that we thought it was a bad location. And we learned afterwards that DOT issued the permit for that location anyway. So, given that context, for the sake of efficiency, and so as not to waste our time as a board of volunteers, we're going to try a slightly different format for our output that doesn't commit us as a committee to generating some kind of support or analysis that we really don't have the information to conduct. Our focus will be to provide a forum for any objections and feedback for the community, as always. What I'm going to propose is that our resulting resolutions for each request are essentially scoped to whether or not there is significant objection to the request or no significant objection to the location and the specifics of the request. As I said, we've seen it's incredibly difficult for us as volunteers to arrive at informed support or denial when we're lacking so much context and details. And so, it's my thinking that this limited scope will be more commensurate to the limited information that DOT bestows upon us, but it'll still accurately characterize the feedback that we're getting. And the most important thing here is that the community still has this forum to air any objections or complaints or feedback. This is this committee meeting and these community board hearings are really sometimes the only opportunity that the community has to say whether or not there is a significant problem with the location or the details of what on the surface level DOT is presenting to us as requested specifics. But as I said, we want to provide that forum for community feedback. Our resolution will reflect that feedback and whether or not there's significant objection or no significant objection, but that it doesn't make sense for us to go all the way towards like supporting or saying everything is fully fleshed out in a full-throated fashion if we don't have all the details. So I wanted to provide that characterization at the top and some context for what we anticipate will be the format of the positions that we're going to take on some of these applications tonight. So with that scoping, again, we'll dive right into these requests and providing the forum for any feedback on these requests from members of our own committee and the community, anyone from the community who's in attendance. With each of these requests, we'll try to go as efficient as possible. We'll hear anything the requester would like us to hear. We'll let members of the committee ask any questions that they might have. And then, as I said, most importantly, let any members of the public who are in attendance ask any questions or provide any feedback on the request that they have that we can incorporate into our resolution as a finding of significant objection or no significant objection to the request. Finally, at the end of each item, the committee will go into our business session where only members of the committee will talk to discuss what action to take. So with that format for the evening, we'll go ahead and get started. Our first request this evening is for a no parking anytime sign in front of the Mosdot Shuva Israel Synagogue at 122 East 58th Street. As I mentioned, we don't have a letter from DOT or a formal request, and no, so we don't have much of an explanation from DOT about the specific recommendation. DOT did theoretically do a preliminary study, but it was not made available to us. It was, as I understand it, in fact, left up to the applicant to come to us to explain that this was DOT's recommended sign to address their request and to guess about, say, why DOT chose this sign as opposed to something else like no overnight parking. So again, we don't have much context here, and it doesn't necessarily make sense for us to start, reinventing the wheel by replicating the studies that DOT has done. So I'm going to suggest that we limit our discussion here to determining whether there is any major objection to the proposed sign that we have before us. We do have representatives from the synagogue here, I believe. Is that true?
Yes. Hi.
Jessica? Hi, Jessica.
Hi.
Great. So my understanding here is that we're dealing with a no parking anytime sign, which is what DOT has recommended. And I'll turn things over to you, Jessica. And as far as all that framing goes, I hope you realize that our frustration is directed at DOT and kind of the process that we have to deal with here, and is not directed at you at all. Is there anything else that you'd like us to know about this request?
So going first, I'm not sure if I should be like leading, like if I should be telling you guys why I want it, or if it really is just to answer any questions. I guess I'll take your lead on that. But
Tell us what you think what you think we should know about the request. But provide whatever context you'd like us to have.
Well, to answer one of your concerns that you just mentioned, why a no parking anytime sign versus no overnight. I think the reason why the DOT suggested that, based on my conversations with them, is the majority of our activities and our services are at nighttime. When it wouldn't really, like, an overnight no parking sign wouldn't help us at all. Like, we're a full functioning yeshiva, we're an education facility, we do services, our community has thousands of members, and like I said, most things take place at night, including our learning. So
Okay, thanks. And the goal here and what prompted you to make this request was essentially to create a safe loading and unloading zone for those events. Was that?
And drop off and pick up for our members, the majority of which are, older.
Okay, great, thanks. I suppose the only other major question I have initially is how long of a space is this sign getting allotted for? Is it two parking spaces long? Do you know exactly what's being introduced here?
That's a great question, and forgive me, this is my first experience with the DOT and with this forum, so I didn't know I had options.
I don't know if it's necessarily options or that they have a menu you can pick off of, but I'm wondering if when they made their recommendation to you, they gave you a sense of what to ask us for.
They didn't, but I can't imagine needing more than two. Like, I'm not looking to, take up the whole block. But the buildings both in front of us, on both sides of us, are both empty. So like perhaps 2 spots would suffice. It would still be in front of our building.
I believe that's the standard, but again, without that kind of detail from DOT, we're sort of just guessing.
EJ?
Yeah, Joel.
So just 2 spots will easily fit. Their building is about 55 feet long, wide of street frontage. There's plenty of room for 2 spots, if that's what we're talking about.
Hey, so this is Colleen from DOT. I just want to clarify what the procedure is. My deputy borough commissioner has been emailing Marissa, and they've been communicating about this, about when we receive requests for signage such as no parking or no standing. So DOT completes a preliminary review of quality of life signage change request that we receive from many stakeholders. If DOT does not foresee an issue with the quality of life request, we will refer them, that is the stakeholder, to obtain support from their building managers, residents, and from the local community board. After receiving the resolution, the community board should inform DOT, and DOT will complete the study and implement the sign change, given that there's no issues with the preliminary study. If a constituent reaches out to the CV prior to engaging with DOT, we would prefer that the constituent contact our office, which is the Manhattan Borough Commissioner's office, so we can do the initial study. We always ask the constituents to come to the community board and to request a resolution from the community board because it's a quality of life. In terms of, what the standard is and how much we give, it's usually 1 car length that we would give for these requests, just so you know.
Okay, thank you, Colleen.
You're welcome.
That was my understanding of what process DOT goes through and the extent of information that DOT provides through the process. But that's helpful to know that we're talking about 1 car length. Thank you. Okay, Joel, did you have any other information about this application that you want us to be aware of?
No, I think you already asked my question about the length, and now we know it's 1 car length. There was posting all over the block when I visited on Sunday. I think in the application we saw that the synagogue notified the neighbors. Only 1 neighbor wrote back, and that neighbor didn't object. That was the deli across the street. There's not much on this block. There, as Jessica said, there's a lot of empty space. And there's a lot of like service entrances for other buildings, and the library takes up a whole bunch of space there on the north side. So it's not a block where I think other people will care about parking. But it is a through street to the bridge. But if Colleen says, I mean, that's DOT's prerogative to say. I only had one question, which was there's signage on the building that says besides, well, there's no signage for the synagogue, but there's sign for the school. And there's also signage for restaurant and catering facilities. I'm just wondering how that plays in. Is that still closed because of COVID or?
Yeah, no plans to reopen. We kept the professional kitchen, but to really service the students and to like for all the events that we host. But no, we are not functioning for the public at all.
Okay. That was all I had.
Okay. Thanks, Joel. Are there any other questions from any other members of the committee? Yeah, Maki.
Thanks, EJ. Just a question regarding the use of the parking space. Is that only for the organization requesting the application? Or for example, if a patron of the library across the street was using Access-a-Ride, would they be able to use that to drop off and pick up folks as well?
Are you asking me?
I can answer that. So the regulation is.
Yeah, go ahead,
Sure.
Colleen.
The
Thanks.
regulation is for any and everyone, to use. It's not a regulation that's solely designated to the synagogue. If there is an Access-a-Ride that needs curbside access space to pull up to safely discharge, clientele, yes, they can pull up in the curb to do so.
Thanks.
And the synagogue wouldn't have any objection to that either, I'm assuming.
No,
I don't.
Of course not.
Yeah, I don't think. I also don't think it would be up to them if the sign.
No, I
does
just
what
wanted to make
Colleen is
sure it
saying.
wasn't like a reserved only for their use only kind of a space.
Yeah, I don't think they would actually have any way of enforcing that. Any other questions from anyone on the committee? All right. With that, we'll open it up to any members of the public who are in attendance for any questions that they have or comments on the request that we've heard. If you're in attendance and you have any comment or question that is germane to this specific request for a 1 car length, no stopping, no parking anytime sign at this address, please use the raise hand feature in Zoom now so we can get a sense of everyone who wants to speak. Okay, not seeing any hands from any members of the public who are in attendance. It does not look like anyone would like to speak with either an additional question or a comment to this application. So we'll move into our committee's business session on this application. We have not heard any objection to this application. I don't know, obviously, if any members of the committee, obviously, this is just for members of the committee at this point to speak. If any members of the committee have any comment on this at this point, please feel free to speak up and use your hand. Yeah, BJ.
Yeah, just out of curiosity, that area is such a busy corridor with traffic, with the 57th Street crosstown rush hour traffic. And so I know it's no parking anytime, but is the street usually are there any street parking around there, or is it going to cause more congestion? I'm just curious about that because I do know that that area gets very, very busy during rush hour, particularly with the overflow traffic. Just curious.
Joel, you took a look at this, right?
I looked. I don't remember what the signage is on the rest of the block. I thought it was like metered parking for no standing except deliveries. But Colleen, do you know? Or Jessica, you might know what.
I mean, we're
now.
Yeah, I guess we're technically in business session here.
Okay.
Was this a question that you wanted to pose to the applicant, BJ?
Sure, if that's okay. Mhm.
Jessica, do you know?
I'm very hesitant to like make any guesses here.
Yeah.
I can't really opine one way or the other, but I can't imagine one no parking sign for one car length that's going to have a significant effect on the traffic one way or the other, is my instinct.
Yep. And
Yeah.
our desire to not guess at these things is why I mentioned at the top that we are probably going to try to, limit the scope here to just characterizing whether we think there's major objection. Yeah, Joel.
I took a picture when I was there, and it happens to have the no standing sign. So for the rest of the block, or going east from this side from this building, it's all no standing anytime. So I think that's to promote the flow that BJ was asking about. But from just to the east of this building and going west towards Park Avenue, it's 6 hour. It's currently 3 hour commercial vehicles from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. and 6 hour metered parking from 6 p.m. to midnight. So all they're doing is taking a one no standing space and making it a no parking space. But no standing except for deliveries. So that space is being used right now for deliveries. Now it'll only be used for pickup and drop off. That I don't think it's going to affect traffic flow on that block.
Okay. Thanks, Joel.
Yeah.
BJ, did you have any other comments you wanted to add?
Nope, that was it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Any other comments from any members of the committee? Okay, well, far be it for me to try to characterize things for the committee, but it does, at least from all the information we've received and from the lack of commentary from members of the public, sound like there's no real significant objection to this change, and we don't have any specific concerns about it adding to congestion on the block. If anyone thinks otherwise, please feel free to speak up. But otherwise, I think we could entertain a pretty straightforward motion here. And I guess I would suggest that the sorry, Jessica, we are in our business session here where we're trying to decide. But did you have something that you wanted to add?
Are we going to go over like what the next steps would be in this meeting, or would I have to follow up with you privately?
I think you would need to follow up with DOT. What we're gonna do as a committee is take action here on a resolution. We'll, in a minute, we'll probably take a vote on a resolution that may or may not say that there's been no significant objection to this proposed sign, and that the community doesn't oppose it at all. That resolution that we'll vote on as a committee tonight will go in front of our full board on Thursday, February 9th. And it would get voted on by the entire Community River 5 on Thursday, February 9th. At that point, it gets handed to DOT as a position saying the community is okay with this. And then it's back in the hands of DOT to tell you what the next steps would be.
Okay, thank you for that. I appreciate that.
Sure. Yep. Yeah, you bet. So anyway, would anyone on the committee like to make a motion characterizing the fact that we have no problem with this application?
Agent, I can do that?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, so I would move that since there was no significant objection expressed by anyone in the community, that we resolve to approve a single no standing anytime parking space in front of 122 East 58th Street.
Thanks, Joel. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. All right, with a motion and a second, we will take the resolution that Joel just mentioned to a vote. And we'll start with Jonathan.
Yes.
Thank you. Sarah? Is Sarah here? Sarah is absent. Nancy?
Yes.
Tristan?
Yes.
Kathy?
Yes.
Maki?
Yes.
David,
Yes.
BJ,
Yes.
Pete,
Yes.
Janice,
Yes.
George,
Yes.
Joel,
Yes.
Sam,
Yes.
and I'm a yes as well. That passes unanimously. So anyway, thank you, Jessica, for coming in. As I said, this committee vote will next go to our full board meeting on Thursday, February 9th, at which point the full board of Community Board 5 will vote on the resolution as well. You have the option of it. You don't have to attend that. You have the option of attending it and speaking during our public session where anyone has the opportunity to speak for 2 minutes. But the full board will vote on that evening. And then, as I said, it'll most likely go back to DOT.
Thank you very, very much, everyone, for your time and consideration. I'm so happy right now. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Jessica. Have a good night.
Thank you, you too.
All right. With that, we'll move on to our second request of the evening. Next up it's a package of 2 requests by Go New York Tours, doing business as Top View Sightseeing, for 2 sightseeing bus stops, one on 7th Avenue between 40th and 41st, with pickups, drop-offs every 30 minutes from 8:10 in the morning to 6:10 at night. We're told this is currently a no standing zone. It is an existing commercial bus stop already, operated by Gray Line, and DOT tells us that the length of the existing stop allows for the addition of another bus company. The second location is 7th Avenue between 47th and 48th Street. Pickups, drop-offs every 30 minutes from 8 to 6. It's currently no standing. Also currently used by Gray Line. And this location for Top View would be a relocation from the bus's current stopping location at 50th Street on 7th Avenue. Once again, DOT is saying that the current bus stop length here at this location is would allow for the addition of another company. One thing I'll note here is that this second location that Go New York Tours is requesting, as I've said, it's already used by one bus company, Gray Lines, and the exact same location is in our third item of the evening, which is a request by a third company to operate there at the same location. DOT is coming to us tonight, essentially recommending that this stop have in total 3 operators at it. We obviously should consider both of these applications, both of these operators independently, but it is very much worth noting that DOT is proposing in total 3 operators at that one location. So the first thing I'll do this evening is turn things over to the requester. Do we have anyone from Go New York Tours here with us this evening?
Hi, this is Asen Kostarinov, the president of Go New York Tours Inc.
Hello, Asen. Thanks for joining us. What, if any, information do you think we should have, additional information do you think we should have about this request?
Well, I can talk a little bit about the relocation. We currently have an approved bus stop, which we have been using for like 5 or 6 years on 50th Street. Actually, it is on 7th Avenue between 50th and 51st. So it is just a couple of blocks north. The sidewalk there is a lot narrower, so there's a lot less space. And we are relocating, we want to relocate to 47th, basically between 7th Avenue between 47 and 48, because there's a lot more public space at that location. One of the reasons. So we believe that it would just help everyone. It would help with our operation to expeditiously load and unload passengers onto our vehicles. I just want to mention that Gray Line, that as you mentioned, it is an operator that has not been operating for about 3 years. So beginning of March 2020, they stopped operating and they've never operated. So that bus company has not been operating since March 2020. And the bus stop on 7th Avenue between 47 and 48 is not being utilized. To my knowledge, this bus stop has been a sightseeing bus stop for about 15 years. And again, the last 3 years, it has not been utilized. A lot more space. It is a lot more, it looks like a much better receptive area for tourists to get on the buses. And we believe that that's a win-win for everybody. Regarding the second location, it is, look, I mean, I walk the streets of Midtown every day. I live in Midtown. I work in Midtown. Obviously, I walk around every day, and I don't believe that we're going to pose any problem on 7 between 41st and 40th, because there's just enough space to safely load and unload expeditiously, as long as it is expeditious. Unlike some others, we don't just generally park buses and lay over for hours and hours at a time or anything like that. We keep our buses moving, so the community should know that. Like, I mean, we really load and go and load and go. So there is no situation where the bus would park and lay over there for like 2 to 3 hours at a time and block traffic. So more or less, this is what I wanted to point out.
Okay. Thank you, Asen. And that second location, that's not a relocation of another pickup or drop off right now. Those would essentially be new pickups and drop offs. Is that correct?
Well, that's not what we have like agreed with the DOT, but I'll tell you that we have a bus stop location on 46th between Broadway and 8th. And that's been, there's construction going on there. So we haven't been able to use the bus stop since about end of July 2022, so for about 6 months now. And in reality, for us, it's kind of a relocation, because we're supposed to get we were supposed to kind of get a relocation of that bus stop, but we really didn't do it because we knew that we are getting this bus stop. So although it may not be official, it really kind of is a relocation as well.
Okay, that's helpful context. Thank you, Asen.
Okay.
We'll move down to any other questions that members of the committee might have. Jonathan, I know you probably took a look at this application. Did you have anything at the top that you wanted to add or ask?
No, I did take a look at it. It's the 40th Street one is already, you know, a busy corridor. It's got a good size sidewalk there. The 47th one is actually in front of, what is it, the Renaissance Hotel. So it's a pretty wide sidewalk right there. There's not a lot of stuff in the sidewalk, you know, stopping the flow of traffic. So they'll have plenty of room to operate there. That's about it.
Okay. Thanks, Jonathan. If any members of the committee have any questions as to the request, please go ahead and raise your hand. And I see George's hand. George, please go ahead.
Yes, this is, I may sound like a broken record, but I've brought this up before, that it seems that we have proudly, or maybe not so proudly, have the location of the nation's largest bus terminal right adjacent to our district, the Port Authority bus terminal. Using our street space for loading and unloading, whether it's express buses or private buses or tour buses, seems to me the bus terminal is the best location, unless it can be shown that there is no capacity to accommodate more buses. Bus ridership has declined because of the enormous decline in office building activity because of the virus. I think it would be behooving on the city or the Port Authority to demonstrate that there is no capacity at the bus terminal, and therefore the streets should be used for loading. End of rant.
Thanks, George. Yeah, one thing I want to clarify is that Community Board 5 is definitely on record as saying that intercity pickups and drop-offs should be moved off of our streets and into the Port Authority bus terminal, either now or definitely when the Port Authority bus terminal is reconstructed. I don't know that as a community board that we have ever taken a blanket position saying that hop on, hop off style sightseeing buses should not be operating on the streets. I simply don't think we have a general board policy on that across the board, and it's certainly within the agency of any individual to advocate either for or against that. So I did just want to clarify what actions Community Board 5 has taken in the past on those two different types of buses. As always, George, much appreciate the comment and the perspective. Next up, Maki, do you have a question?
Thank you, EJ. I have two questions, if you don't mind, but they're brief. The first question, and I'm assuming that the answer is there has been no issue, but I just wanted to confirm that the adjacent businesses have been notified and there's no objection. And the second question was, I just wanted to make sure that that is not co-located with the M7 bus stop, which I think is on 42nd and 50th. But there seems to be an issue with that bus getting through the Times Square area, and I just wanted to make sure that the tour buses weren't holding them up.
Thanks, Maki. This hearing was posted for the as is required by the applicant over the last, and that posting has been visible on the streets for the last 3 days. So theoretically, if there is any objection from neighbors and local businesses, we'll get to hear about it in just a second. This is the primary forum for that. As far as, I'm sorry, your second question was
the M7 bus stops. I think they're on 42nd.
Oh, the M7. The letter from DOT did not indicate that any MTA buses are operating at this location. Austin, do you know the answer to that?
There is no MTA. It's a sightseeing bus stop currently on 7th Avenue between 40th and 41st. The MTA bus stop is a block north on 7th and between 41st and 42nd. And if any sightseeing company, not my company, is blocking that bus stop for any reason, then that should be dealt with. But there's no, if we're talking about the particular bus stop that I have applied for, there is no MTA bus stop on that block at all.
Hi, it's Colleen. Even if there was an MTA bus stop and it's being shared, we would indicate that in the letter, okay?
Yep. No, yeah, that was not in the letter. Thanks, Colleen. Okay, thanks. Next question is Janice.
Thanks, CJ. I just had a question about the hours, seeing that they're from 8 to 6. I was just wondering if the other bus stops also operate at those hours, since rush hour and such, if that's ever been an issue.
Sorry, when you say other bus stops, do you mean just sightseeing buses in general in the neighborhood, or are you talking specifically about Gray Line at this location?
No, other sightseeing bus stops.
Austin, do you know if that's quite standard, at least for the other stops for Go New York?
So, I'm not sure that I understand the question, but if the question is if there's any problem during rush hour, let's say 3:30 or like 4 o'clock to 6 o'clock, no, I'm not aware of any such problem in general. I'm really not aware of any such problems. I don't think it's a problem, to be honest with you. And these specific stops, they're totally sightseeing bus stops. They're not shared with MTA or anything else. So I don't see how any problem would come about.
Does that
during the rush
address
hour
what you were at? Does that address what you were asking, Janice?
Yeah, I guess I don't know if DOT has like Colleen, if that's part of the survey, just assessing what the traffic is like at those hours. But I think particularly between like 8 and 9 and 5 to 6.
Colleen, do you have anything you want to add to that? I mean, I'm sure during rush hour traffic
So we
goes
we
up.
look, yeah, we look at the current condition to make sure that there's no conflict or there's no congestion. And even if it's a shared stop, we also look at the schedules to make sure that they don't overlap.
Great. Sounds like not an issue then. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Janice. Any other questions from anyone on the committee? Yeah, John.
So I know you said Gray Line, they stopped operating, they ceased operating. Do those permits expire at some point and these are all going to get shuffled around, you know, with all the bus companies or what? And that's really more for Essen.
I had the same question, though I was going to point it at Colleen. Colleen, do you know when Gray Line's permit expires, particularly if they haven't been operating for 3 years?
So what I've been told is that Gray Line is no longer operating there, and we don't know when they will come back.
Yeah,
I
but
I don't have information on when their permit expired, but I can find out. I mean, right now, from what I know and what I've been hearing is that they're not operating, and again, we don't know when they're coming back or if they plan to come back.
How long is a permit usually issued for?
Oh, it's 3 years.
3 years. Okay.
Yeah.
So theoretically speaking, their permit is going to, I mean, if they haven't been operating for something close to 3 years, then their permit would most likely expire and require them to come back and get it renewed sometime soon.
And of course, they would have to come back to the DOT as well, just so you know, to reapply.
Would it come back to us if they reapply?
Yes,
Or would it come
it
to the
would come
community
back,
board as
yeah.
well?
Mhm.
Okay. Does that help, Jonathan?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Any other questions from members of the committee? All right. With that, we'll move on to any members of the public who are in attendance today. If you have any questions or comments on this request, please use the raise hand feature in Zoom right now. Okay. We're seeing 2, so we'll give these members in attendance the opportunity. Oh, okay, 3. We'll give these members an opportunity to speak. Please make sure that your comment is specific to this application that we're hearing about now, and please try to limit your comment to 2 minutes. We will start with Caroline. Caroline, you can unmute.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Caroline Engel, and I am here to represent on behalf of Twin America Gray Line. On tonight's agenda for the meeting are the bus stops request of Topview and Aurora for 41st Street and 7th Avenue and 47th Street and 7th Avenue. These are arguably the busiest crossroads of Times Square and are now issued by the New York City Department of Transportation for the use of Gray Lines, a wholly owned subsidiary of Twin America. Twin America provides hop-on, hop-off open bus double-decker sightseeing tours, is licensed by the Department of Consumer Affairs and operates at these bus stops and on routes authorized by the DOT. Prior to the pandemic, Twin America Gray Line served over 1 million customers annually with approximately 1,000 union employees. And as one of the oldest sightseeing companies, we see that we have become an important part of the fabric of the city's vibrant tourism community. As one of the largest stakeholders affected by the current request, we would like to briefly address our concerns. Although Twin America has not operated its sightseeing services since the pandemic closure, Twin America will begin running training buses with anticipation that full service will be recommenced during the spring, summer of 2023. We request that the board accept our comments in that light. As the agenda properly reflects, both operators, Topview and Aurora, the agenda item, seek allowance to pick up and discharge at the bus stop located at 7th Avenue and 47th and 48th Street. Considering the permit currently issued to Gray Line, 3 competing sightseeing services would potentially be allowed to stop at the same location. Regarding the stop located at 41st Street and 7th Avenue, Top View's request has the potential of allowing for 2 competitive operators, as previously mentioned. The hop-on, hop-off sightseeing community in New York has addressed these issues previously. Allowing for multiple operators and competitors to operate at the same stop has in the past resulted in significant issues. Although there are some stops in NYC that are shared, the location of these stops at 2 of the busiest intersections in New York City within Times Square make shared locations unadvisable. First, traffic congestion needs to be considered. What will occur when 2 or 3 operators utilize the same spot is queuing congestion. When one operator is rightfully picking up or discharging passengers, the other operators will be waiting and most likely double parked in the roadway, waiting for bus stop entrance. This will affect the flow of traffic on these roadways. Secondly, and as a direct result of the congestion, is safety concerns both to the pedestrians and motorists. Traffic congestion will have a direct impact on these 2 concerns. Lastly, the sidewalks will be congested as well. Passengers waiting for the bus on the 2 or 3 different operators will cause significant blockage on the sidewalks, a concern that has been addressed, continues to be addressed, and has been somewhat alleviated with the restructuring of Times Square area. We appreciate your consideration, and I'm here to answer questions.
Thank you for the comment, Caroline. That adds some context for us. 2 questions for you. Number 1, do you happen to know when the current permit expires and that Gray Line will have to reapply for permits at these locations?
I figured I would be asked, so I've already asked the higher ups, but at this time I don't have an answer, so I will happy to circle back with you.
Okay. And secondly, do you have a time frame for when Gray Line does plan to start operating again at these locations?
Spring of 2023.
Okay. All right. Thank you for the comment.
Thank you.
Next up, we'll hear from Tom Harris.
Thank you very much for agreeing to listen to me. And I just want to say at the outset that I share in the committee's frustration with some of the placement and process for these bus stops. I agree with everything that Caroline had mentioned before about this bus stop. The one caveat I would say is that we have been working with Top View throughout the years, and they have proven to be good operators. I work with Asen, with Doug, and with Jonathan, and they have always been responsive to any issues or concerns that we have. So for that reason, for the spot on 47th Street, especially given Gray Line is not here, we don't object to that. We just would ask the DOT do their own analysis once Gray Line comes back, just to see if the spot is oversaturated so that they can revisit it at that time. As for 40th and 41st Street, I think that that's just outside of our district, so I don't know that it would be right for me to comment on that spot. Lastly, while the buses might not be an issue, I would just caution that Top View's ticket selling model is to have a lot of agents on the street selling, and that there should be some restrictions, especially at these bus stops, as far as the number of agents selling at the location. And while the buses might not be there, the patrons will be there queuing up. So that's going to involve managing 2 lines of buses. And I just want that to be noted in the stipulations, if any, to the Department of Transportation. I'll comment about Iconic afterwards, because that's a completely different, after we hear that.
All right. Thanks very much, Tom. Next up for comment on this specific application, we've got Charles Nolan.
Yes, hi, good evening, everyone. I just had a question for the DOT. About a year ago, we have been told that the stop specifically on 7 and 47 will not be available for any sightseeing companies due to the construction located directly across the street from the TKTS steps. Now I understand this construction is about to end. We have 711 7th Avenue about to start. How is this decision changing so quick, although construction keeps on happening?
Colleen, do you want to respond to that?
I'm sorry, the question relates to construction and with, can you rephrase that question again?
Sure. This particular stop, I believe, has been issued temporarily out of service, I will say, sign from ICBPS because of the bottleneck that the construction across the street were causing, and the impact of traffic of double-decker buses pulling out of the stop into 7th Avenue, knowing that this is directly a dead end for the stop. There is no line continuation. You need to cross 1 or 2 lanes to go back on 7th Avenue. So knowing that this construction is not finished and another one is starting at 711 7th Avenue, why is this no-fly zone being relieved like that?
So, I mean, whenever we get a request, we always look at the land use of the block and the surrounding area. And if we feel that the construction is not going to interfere with the operation of the intercity or the sightseeing bus, we would move forward and approve it. I would have to look into those sites, both of the construction sites. I can get back to the community board about that and let you know.
Okay, Charles, hopefully that addressed
yes, thank
some
you.
of your question. Okay, thank you. All right. Not seeing any other comments from any members of the public. I'm just going to follow up with one final question directed at Colleen. Colleen, in the issuing of these permits, is there any stipulation able to be added that has anything to do with the number of agents operating on the street, as Tom suggested?
So EJ, I don't believe there is a stipulation that we have as part of the permit package when issuing the permits to the applicants. I think that is out of our realm. We don't want to dictate and tell, the companies, have the numbers of agents that they should have out there selling tickets. That's a separate issue.
Okay. Thanks, Colleen. Yeah, Jonathan, do you have a final question?
What about, I went out there today and one of the companies had a, one of those camping tents, shelters. Are there regulations against that too? Or like, having semi-permanent structures or something like that?
Colleen, do you know the answer to that?
They're not supposed to have that. No, I'm not, no, that's not part of the permitting process.
Jonathan, this was a bus company at one of these locations in the request?
Yes, this was up at 48th or 49th. It's a different stop, but
different stop.
Yeah. But as I noticed as I was walking through, that was one of the concerns I had earlier.
Okay, so it wasn't another bus operator at one of these two stops, which theoretically are only permitted for Gray Line right now, and Gray Line is not currently operating. So this was at a different stop.
Operator, different stop.
But also it sounds like that operator should not have had a tent set up.
According to our DOT participant, yes.
Okay, got it. All right, thanks. Any other final questions from anyone else on the committee? All right. With my thanks to everyone who responded to a question. We'll take the committee into our business session relative to this request now. You know, as I said, it doesn't make a lot of sense for us as a committee to consider ourselves the arbiter of whether this permit gets issued or not. You know, there's a lot of factors surrounding these things. We're, of course, about to hear a second request relative to one of these exact same locations. We, of course, heard tonight about an existing permit for one of these locations that is not currently being exercised, but we're hearing some inclination that the applicant may start using it again and or apply to be reissued the permit when it expires, which, again, without knowing the dates, might be sometime soon. We should probably not, as a committee of volunteers here, try to bend over backwards assessing all the possible combinations of the ways that this might play out in the coming months. I'm going to suggest that we mostly try to scope our characterization here to whether or not we believe that there are significant concerns or significant objections to what DOT has put in front of us, which is a permit for Go New York Tours, doing business as Top View, to operate at these two locations under more or less the current state of affairs. So I'll open things up now to any comment from the committee, but you know, again, for my part, I'm gonna suggest that we look at it in the context of there's one permit for an existing bus company, Gray Line. They're not currently operating, and we know that it will expire at some point in the future. So does it appear that we have or are hearing significant concern to Go New York Tours receiving a permit to operate at these two sites, whereby there's no one currently operating, with the caveat of what we know about the currently existing permit? We'll start with comment from David.
Thanks, EJ. You know, I was rereading the letter for this one a little more closely. And I mean, we're not even asked for any kind of approval. It's input and comments. So I guess that's the extent of our review on these. You know, and I guess that's a function of does the committee itself have input or comments, and what's been brought you know, to light by holding tonight's meeting. But beyond that, it doesn't even sound like DOT is asking us for anything that's like an approval of these.
Yeah, and certainly, you know, I think that was one factor into why we've been discussing over the last couple of months tweaking or reframing our output, you know, to make it a little bit more accurate and commensurate with not just the information that we're getting, but also the way that we know it's acted on. In December or November, we, you know, went out of our way to assess whether there were other locations that the applicant had applied for and whether we thought there was a specific better location. And we recommended that, and we explicitly sort of denied a particular location and recommended another one. DOT issued that permit, you know, for the location anyway. As you said, it doesn't appear that DOT is asking for explicit approval or denial, or you know, rigorous analysis of what other locations may be better. It does seem that one of the most efficient ways for us to participate in this process is to you know, simply say whether or not there are significant objections to the location and operator that is before us. So I think what you're saying is right, David. And again, I think here it's incumbent on us to determine whether there's significant objection to Top View, getting a permit to operate at these 2 locations where no one else is operating right now. Yeah, Maki.
I wouldn't necessarily characterize this as objections, but I would identify 3 concerns based on the conversation so far. The first one is the existing Gray Line permit, acknowledging that the hop on, hop off returning is, and the tourists coming back is good for the city, but would lead to greater congestion. And we certainly can't be the arbiter of who gets priority for the permits, who came first and that type of thing. The second one being the bus congestion, in addition to the MTA bus lines, the M7, M20, and I think it's 104 maybe. But there's obviously MTA bus lines for the general public to use that go through that corridor as well. And then the third concern, as brought up by a few people, would be the congestion along the sidewalks, both because of the ticket sales agents and passenger queuing. So those are the 3 concerns that I think I captured through the discussion.
Yeah, that sounds accurate. Thanks, Maki. Janice.
Thanks, CJ. Yeah, I would definitely just second what Maki said. I mean, having taken the lead on the last sightseeing bus stop application, I definitely saw all the concerns that Maki had mentioned about, the bus not being able to pull up to the sidewalk and just, just congestion all around. So I definitely think that's something of a concern.
Thanks, Janice. Any other comments, David?
I don't know if people noticed, but Marissa shared the fact that DOT got back to us on whether there were alternate locations, and out of the 3 applications, I think there was 1 alternate. So everything else was ruled out because of other parking conflicts. So we couldn't even, unlike the last one, we couldn't even turn around and say, are there other alternate locations, because all of the alternates that the applicant requested were turned down by DOT.
Yep. Thanks, David. And I did see that we received that, after our committee meeting started tonight by email. I think I would stick with the framing that the scoping that we've suggested here. I don't know that it's up to us to try and wade into analysis of multiple locations. We're getting the information by email as we're online here. We don't have necessarily the expertise or the full-time day jobs with which to analyze these things against each other, as DOT presumably does in their preliminary analysis. And as we've seen in the past, recommending an alternative location doesn't necessarily get listened to anyway. I think I would continue to suggest to the committee that the best thing we can do here is to try and characterize, as other members of the committee have been bringing up, whether there are concerns about this particular permit being issued to this particular operator at this particular location, and so simply characterize them in our resolution. Comment from George.
Okay, I think I'm on mute. I'm just going to return to the earlier point about having a plan for these buses and whether they should not be in the bus terminal. And a bigger issue that was brought to my attention, maybe others, is that there's a growing interest in reusing street space in the most crowded parts of the city, particularly our community board, for pedestrian space. And that we don't have a review of how much space we should be providing for pedestrians. And this is a small part of that issue, but maybe this is the place where we can raise our voice and say, we don't have a comprehensive street use plan. We do have many voices. Municipal Arts Society this morning talked to me about this a bit. Where and how can we have more open space and green space in the most crowded business district in the United States? Can't we get the city DOT to take a serious look at it? And can we introduce that into one of our resolutions? And
Okay. Noted. Thanks, George. Sam.
Yeah, look, I agree with what everyone has said, and I agree, EJ, with the way that we should be looking at these applications. I guess my question comes from never really having thought. We've talked about buses in the context of intercity buses, and we have always been told by DOT in the city that we have been unable to prevent buses from using the streets because of interstate or intercity commuter commerce clauses and all sorts of things. I guess my question is really, are we in a situation in which DOT can refuse these applications? Is there some sort of precedent in which we're allowing private companies to use these sidewalks? And, you know, when we talk about these restaurants using the lanes for their private enterprise, we've had long discussions about the appropriateness about that. I'm not sure we've ever had a discussion about whether DOT can simply say to these bus companies, no, there are too many buses, this is a congested area. I'm not sure whether that conversation has ever been had, but I'd be curious if someone from DOT can indicate, can there simply be a flat refusal for additional bus stops as far as DOT is aware for these sightseeing buses?
Sam, that's a really excellent question you just raised. Unfortunately,
Colleen, we are in our business session now, but
sorry.
I no, it's okay. I'd like to hear the perspective on this too, because I think we've heard in the past that DOT felt they needed to issue intercity permits for intercity bus stop pickups, but I am curious from your perspective how that applies to sightseeing buses.
I mean, with sightseeing buses, I mean, it's interesting that you should raise that as well. As I mentioned, we can't deny sightseeing buses. It's the same as intercity stops as well. I mean, they have a business, and if we were to do that, then it would be questionable as well. Which, again, going back to the intercity bus, there was a local law that was passed many, many years ago where, we are required to provide, location stops for the intercity buses, which as well, we would have to do for the sightseeing buses as well.
So from DOT's perspective, they can't not issue these permits in response to requests. And again, whether or not we like that as a committee, what you're essentially saying is that when this request comes in, DOT will find a way to issue it. Is that kind of the status quo?
Yes, kind of, yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Sam, for the comments. Colleen, if there's a way to send along maybe to our board office that local law that you just referred to, I think we'd be interested to take a look at that if you're able to provide that to us.
Yeah, sure. There was a local law many years ago that was passed mandating a city to provide stops for intercity buses. Yeah, I can send that over to Marissa.
Yep, thank you.
Whether it extends to sightseeing buses as well, or whether there's some delineation of which we're not aware.
Sure, I can find out, Sam.
All right. Thanks a lot, Colleen. Okay. Not seeing any other comments from members of the committee. It does seem like we should circle around into deciding what, if any, action to take this evening. I'm still very much of the mind, and of course, this is open to interpretation and action by the members of the committee. I'm still much of the mind that it doesn't make a lot of sense for us as a committee, for all the reasons that we've heard about, to sort of try to come to some kind of all-inclusive approval or denial as a committee. It doesn't really make sense to us. On the other hand, we can, I think about it sort of maybe analogous to the way that some of our other committees, like the SLAP committee, will adopt stipulations by taking a position of kind of deny unless, whereas we'll kind of lay out feedback and stipulation and concern in the format, in the context of a resolution that is then provided to the relevant agency with which to issue their actual, they will make a decision on issuing a permit and what conditions it can be issued under and what specifics can be issued under. I think in this particular situation, as we've heard tonight, we could adopt a resolution that, again, doesn't assert powers that we don't have as a committee, but can indicate that while no one is operating at this bus stop currently, and the issuance of at these two bus stops, and that the issuance of permits to Top View sightseeing would more or less reintroduce sightseeing pickups and drop-offs, restoring pre-pandemic levels of sightseeing operation at these two stops. That we did hear concern about the number of agents operating at these locations and the queuing that are going on there, that we heard concern about the existing permit that's issued to Gray Line, and whether or not Gray Line would continue to start operating maybe at the same time as Top View, if Top View were to be issued a permit, that we're concerned about congestion as it relates to MTA routes along 7th Avenue as well. And as always, that we'd much prefer that DOT come up with some kind of comprehensive street use plan for these areas instead of one-off applications. We could adopt, I think, a resolution to that effect. I'm curious what other members of the committee think about that approach. And I guess if no one has a real problem with it, yeah, George, go ahead. Oh, sorry, I thought I saw George's hand. Curious if anyone has any thoughts on that approach at all.
I do think we should, somewhere in our resolution, if we make a resolution, incorporate a request that the city develop a comprehensive street use plan, so we don't just make these decisions on an ad hoc basis, but that they're part of a broader vision where we're competing for pedestrian needs, green space needs, etc., with the importance of bus sightseeing as well. So we don't have such a plan. Everything is done on an ad hoc basis, and we're left to make decisions without a context. And I think we should raise that concern in our resolution.
I totally agree. We could certainly raise it in our resolution. We've done it before, and I see no problem with reiterating that. Yeah, comment from Maki.
Thanks, CJ. Just whatever we write in the resolution, I think anything that we could do so that that same wording could be applied fairly and equally to all operators applying in vicinity of would be great, because that way we can have some consistency and precedence for moving forward.
And you're referring specifically to what language?
To the language that you laid out, the process of identifying our concerns and stating that, we don't want to get involved with who comes first or not, because that's outside of our scope of influence.
I think that's a good point. And I think it's incumbent on us to make sure that we do that for each of these resolutions going forward. I don't know I don't know that there's a way to apply it fairly, except to just put it on ourselves to make sure that we do that. BJ.
Yeah, sorry. Just to go along with supporting what George said, is there any, I wonder, I'm sure we're not the only community board that deals with the DOT in this type of dilemma or this conundrum. So I'm wondering if there's any power in numbers. Is there any way to collaborate with other community boards to really make this, to amplify our concern, basically, instead of just us being CP5 raising it? Just want to share that.
Thanks, BJ. I think there's a lot we can do outside of, the committee meeting and Robert's rules structure to potentially collaborate with other ones. We are, in a lot of ways, the district that gets hit the hardest because we're the center of the center as far as the city goes. Community Board 4 does deal with a lot of these same issues as well, and we've had conversations with them in the past, and we could certainly always redouble those efforts to coordinate with them. As far as this request goes, I think we should probably bring this in for a landing. Again, I'm going to propose a resolution that again avoids this question of approval or denial, but indicates that while there were no specific objections to this operator in these locations, that the following concerns were raised, including congestion on the sidewalk, whether the existing gray line permit starts to get used at the same time as any additional permit issued here, congestion on the streets, and, as was mentioned, our desire for a more comprehensive street use plan by DOT. If we were to write a resolution along those lines, would folks support that position? All right, seeing a couple nods. Would anyone like to make a motion?
This is not Robert's rules, but so moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Thanks very much. Okay, we'll take it to a vote on a resolution to that effect. And we'll start with Jonathan.
Yes.
Nancy.
Yes.
Tristan.
Yes.
Kathy.
Yes.
Maki.
Yes.
David.
Yes.
BJ.
Yes.
Pete.
Yes.
Janice.
Yes.
George.
Yes.
Joel.
Yes.
Sam.
Yes.
And I am a yes. Okay, so that is so adopted by the committee. Austin, thanks very much for being here and for answering our questions. Yeah, as I was saying about the other requests, this will go before our full board on Thursday, February 9th. At which point, of course, it'll if adopted by the full board, it'll be back in the hands of DOT. So we thank you for showing up today to answer our questions. It's much appreciated, and hopefully this is helpful to you.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, thanks, Austin. We will move now to the third item on the agenda, which is going to be quite similar to our second one. This is two requests by Aurora Tourism Services, doing business as New York Iconic Cruises, for sightseeing bus stops at two locations. The first location is on 42nd Street between 6th Avenue and Broadway, with pickups and drop-offs every 2 hours from 8 in the morning to 11:45 p.m. It's currently a no standing zone. This is an existing MTA bus stop for the M42. DOT tells us that they consider this appropriate for a sightseeing bus stops because it's an existing bus stop. Obviously, the aforementioned M42. It's a wide sidewalk, and there would be somewhat limited pickups and drop-offs at 2-hour intervals. The other location is 7th Avenue between 47th to 48th, the same location that we were just talking about. This has an existing permit issued to Gray Lines, which is not currently operating, although we have, of course, heard already tonight that there's some intention to come back. It's current no standing, and DOT considers it as able to accommodate another operator. Obviously, once again, DOT is sort of in general proposing that 3 operators be able to operate here. So first, we'll turn to the requester. Do we have anyone from Aurora in attendance?
Yes, good evening. My name is Oluwabamshi Jagere. I'm the president of Aurora Tourism Services, LLC.
Great, thank you. In addition to the detail that we just heard, is there anything else you'd like us to know about this request?
Not specifically, but let me form a general background. We are a minority-owned business, and we've been trying to get these stops for about 4 years. This is the closest we've come to getting anything. We made 5 requests for each stop that we proposed, and this happened to be the one that has the preliminary approval from the DOT so far. So it's before your consideration currently.
All right. Thanks very much for the context. We'll next turn things over to any members of the committee who may have questions about this request. BJ, I know you took a look at this. Is there anything that you wanted to add or any questions that you wanted to ask to get us started?
Yeah, my question was about, because it is on 42nd Street and it is the same stop as M42 bus, which is, again, that street is very congested and it's on the same stop. So I was just curious in terms of maybe to Colleen or like how this was approved, other than the fact that it's every 2 hours, but with the crosstown buses, and then there's a shuttle that goes all the way to the 12th Avenue for the ferries. So that street and that bus stop is very, very busy area. So I am concerned, especially during the holidays. I remember when I get out, when I try to get out of that stop, I can't even get off the bus because it's so congested. So I wonder about maybe to Colleen or even to the applicant, how they're going to manage that traffic flow.
I think first I'll kind of point that question at Colleen. Colleen, is there, to the question that BJ asked, is there any other detail you can provide about how that was selected? Obviously, we've got what was written in the letter from DOT. Is there any additional information that's not in the letter that you can add about how that was cited on 42nd Street?
Sure. So again, whenever we get these requests, we look at the land use, we look at whether, what the businesses are in the area. From what I know, we do review the MTA schedule along with the schedules that's provided by the applicant to make sure that they're not conflicting. And if I'm not mistaken, I think an MTA bus is probably every 15 minutes or so, depending. It all depends on the traffic in the area. And what we've determined was that the schedule does not conflict. And we find that Aurora Tourism, their pickups and their drop-offs, again, sightseeing is expeditious. So it's not like they're going to be, waiting there for 20 minutes or 30 minutes or so.
All right. Thanks. BJ, sorry, did you have additional questions that you were wondering if you get clarity on?
No, that was it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions pertaining to this request from any members of the committee? Okay, not seeing anything. We'll next go to any members of the public who are in attendance this evening. If you have any question or comment as to this request, please go ahead and use the raise hand feature in Zoom right now. We've got exactly one, and it is Tom Harris.
Thank
Go
you
ahead,
very
Tom.
much. First, we don't know Iconic, and if there's a way to do an introduction, either through Marissa or after this meeting, I would love to get to know them. I sort of, when I looked at this, I did some research, and I saw that they list their address as 724 7th Avenue, and that's an empty storefront. And when I look at online, it looks like they're already picking up fares at 7th Avenue and 48th Street. So I just sort of come up with questions that I wish I could have asked beforehand, but why wouldn't they look to just get a stop at 48th and 7th Avenue, which seems to be where they're operating now? It also seems like they come in now after hours and have been operating. So I'm not, again, I go back to 47th and 7th. If we, right now, the committee already has 2 bus stops there, adding a third is just going to add chaos and a problem to that spot, because I'm not sure how they sell. I know that they sell online with Eventbrite, but we're going to be managing 3 lines at that location. So again, we talk about the size of the street, but there's a subway entrance there. There's a hotel entrance there. I question that there would be room for 3 buses if they all of a sudden showed up at the same time. So I guess lots of reservations about adding a 3rd bus that we're really not familiar with the operation that is also is already operating without a permit 1 block away, and just why we wouldn't be just looking to apply at that location where I think they would be sharing it with another bus company. The 42nd and 7th, 42nd and Broadway, I defer to DOT on that, but certainly 47th and 7th, I think would not be served well with the 3rd bus company. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. I'm wondering if the applicant wants to address the notion that are you currently operating pickups and drop-offs a block away?
Yes, we currently use the big bus stop for night tours. They close at 6 o'clock, and that's about when we start our operation. That's on 48th and 7th Avenue. But regarding the congestion that was spoken about, we have our schedules for every 2 hours, and we deliberately spanned out our time, pick up and drop off, understanding the possibility of traffic. So if consideration will be laid on the possibility of congesting the road and by customer or by the traffic, it should rather be on companies that go there more frequently. We have given enough space to come in and out every 2 hours, and other companies probably 30 minutes or about so. So we should not be the victim of in an attempt to reduce congestion. It should not be us that would be eliminated while we only applied for a quarter of what other people have applied for.
I'm sorry, as far as picking up and dropping off a block away, you said you're using a big bus stop. Does
Yes.
your operation currently have a permit to pick up and drop off there?
Yes, there are 2 kinds of operation that are in the sightseeing business. There is the license by the state government, which gives any company who does tour or transportation with $5 million insurance the ability to pick up and drop off anywhere in the state of New York. And there is a specific one that is issued by the DOT, city DOT, which is up on, up off. That means you pick up from one location and you go to another location in the same tour, you could drop off or pick up in 10 different places. We don't do that. What we do is to sell online and come back to the same location we pick them from. So we have authorization to do what we do so far.
All right. Thanks very much for characterizing that. Thank you, Tom, for your comment. Next, we'll hear from Charles Nolan.
Yes, hi. Just had a couple of follow-up questions. How many buses are you currently operating?
We have 2 buses. We currently operate 2 buses.
Sorry, how many?
2.
You're operating 2 sightseeing buses. How many DCA sightseeing licenses do you have?
We have one DCS license, but we don't need DCA license to do what we do currently.
Right, but to apply to ICBPS stop, you need to demonstrate that each of your buses on the application, I assume you have disclosed 2 buses on the application. Each bus must have a DCA plate on and a DEP green sticker for compliance with the Environmental Protection Local Law 41. How are you applying without those licensing?
How am I operating without licensing?
No, how are you applying for 2 bus operation, knowing that the second bus, as you say, does not have a DCA plate and a DEP compliance sticker?
I tell you I applied on 2 buses. I told you I operate 2 buses.
Okay, so I guess my question is, how many buses on the application?
I can't remember for now. I have other buses, but you are required to put a minimum of 1 bus for the application. And I think that's what I did. I'm not sure, but that's wasn't relevant when I was applying.
Right. My second question is, where are the buses parked? Where is your garage for maintenance?
I have 2 garages. I have one in Staten Island and the other one in New Jersey, close to Staten Island, in Southampton.
Where are the buses parked tonight? Where were they parked last night? Where are they parked every night?
They are parked in the either New Jersey or Staten Island, but sometimes we lay over in Midtown.
Sometimes, right? So this community board received picture of your buses being parked every night on 30th Street between 12th Avenue and 11th Avenue. My question is, how is the safety maintenance and the basic maintenance of those buses being done? How a driver will report a defect at night? How will that defect be assessed if the buses are parked on public street?
It sounds like the question is, if the buses are being parked on the street, how is maintenance being conducted?
We do maintenance as required by the DOT, and we have several drivers. We take care of our buses in 2 garages, one in Queens and our own garage in New Jersey, while we have storage in Staten Island.
Okay. Charles, did you have any additional comments you wanted to add while you've got the while you've got the floor here?
No, that would be it.
Okay. Thank you very much. Those seem to be all the members of the public who wanted to speak. Any members of the committee, final questions for the requester?
Yes.
Yeah, George, question?
Since you're proposing to be pick up passengers on 42nd Street, why not ask the Port Authority if you could do that at the Port Authority bus terminal, which would be a much better place to get passengers because they would be weather protected, they have restrooms and so forth. it would seem unnatural to have the sightseeing bus company based out of the bus terminal, not out on the street. Have you asked them?
Not specifically, but we'll be delighted to have such an opportunity granted to us if they will.
I didn't quite catch the answer.
The applicant sounded like the applicant said they have not approached the Port Authority bus terminal, but they would be interested potentially to do so. Did I characterize you correctly, sir?
Yes, we'll be happy if they grant us that opportunity. We've not approached them though. But this, the Port Authority is not in charge of approval of bus stop. It's the DOT. So if the DOT has a way of referring that request to the Port Authority, would be happy to follow it up.
Okay. Any other final questions from members of the committee? All right. Well, not seeing any, we'll take this into our business session and determine what, if any, action to take here. Not to, I'm curious to hear comments from the committee and not to prejudge the sense of the committee, but obviously we're talking about one of the same locations that we talked about in the last request. So, I think not only are there the concerns that we highlighted in the prior request, but there are, it sounds like, a couple of additional concerns to this request as well, including the fact that 42nd Street is close to the Port Authority bus terminal, and that in particular might be a good pickup or drop off to take place in the Port Authority instead of on the street. But, curious to hear any comments from members of the committee, but I do believe that we could adopt a similar resolution here saying that this evening we heard the following significant concerns about issuing permits at these particular locations for this operator, including the same gray line permit issue, at least at the 7th Avenue location, that we heard before, and the prospect of not only more than one, but as many as 3 bus stops operating at the same location. Are there any other comments from members of the committee as to what we should be weighing as we try to summarize the concerns of the community here? Yeah, BJ.
Yeah, I just wanted to address that. I know this is, as we are just within our jurisdiction, right, which is CB5, and I understand what the gentleman who had from the community representing and was inquiring about 11th and 12th Avenue and also about the maintenance. But I don't know, as a committee member, whether that's in our purview, but I think it is something to be concerned about. But I do agree that it is 3 buses on that same very congested area, and for whatever reason, DOT has deemed it that it was okay. And I'm looking at their letter again. So I guess what I'm trying to say is we stay within our jurisdiction of what our territory, our area is, right? CB5. And it is worth noting that the gentleman who made that comment is also a competitor from Big Bus, right? So I just want us to make sure that as a committee that we keep that in mind, that it's not just yes, it is a community member, but at the same time, it is a competitor that is raising these questions and has voiced his concern. So that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, BJ. Any other comments from members of the committee? All right. Well, not seeing any, it seems like we should try to bring this in for a landing, and I might be so bold as to suggest that we are approaching something that looks relatively similar to the resolution that we passed on the last request. I think I'd suggest to the committee something that suggests that, you know, while there were no specific problems raised with, you know, an operator operating at one of these two locations, that significant concerns were raised with certain aspects, including the existing gray line permit, the prospect of 2 or as many as 3 permits operating at a single location at the same time, concerns, you know, regarding congestion on the streets, such as the number of agents and competition with MTA bus lines, and I have no problem including as well, once again in the resolution, a call rather for a comprehensive street use plan instead of these one-off applications. I think you know, we're trying this format for the first time, but with the, you know, proper concerns articulated as we've just heard them here and as I've kind of laid them out, again, you know, we could potentially add to this application as well concerns that were raised by the public about where the maintenance is conducted as well. We can certainly list that in the resolution. But with those stipulations, we could potentially, you know, adopt a resolution that says something to the effect of, you know, while DOT has identified these 2 locations as being appropriate, the following significant concerns were raised. That can be the characterization of our resolution, you know, quite similar to the last one that we adopted. Any thoughts or comments on that approach? Any motions as would pertain to that approach? BJ in particular.
I make the motion to approve with those stipulations you laid out and cited.
Okay, except I wouldn't necessarily call it an approve. I think I'd as I was suggesting, I think I'd mostly suggest that we simply raise that the following concerns were cited here in regards to the specific locations.
Noted. Thank you.
Sorry to the applicant. We're in our business session here, and we're not necessarily doing a back and forth at this point. Did you have something that you wanted to raise? Sir, you're muted. Sir, you're muted right now, and we can't hear you. And we are technically in our business session. We are. Sorry. So we have a. Did you have a final comment, sir?
Yes, I'm here. I said I was going to humbly raise my objection to the fact that the comment of a competitor will be recognized in your correspondence, because if we were to start exchanging dossier on other companies, we would spend the eternity doing that. So, but we don't have time for that. We have time to serve our customers diligently and well. That's what we are focused on. I was not requested to bring my record of maintenance to the committee. I would have brought it. So I think it's unfair to have the record of a competitor as a comment on our own record. Except we would, the committee would accept ours as well, which we have a lot of to talk about.
Noted. Okay, noted. Thank you. I guess I'll I'll throw that to the committee. You know, I think it's probably an example of something where we did hear a comment tonight, but I suppose I don't know that we have enough evidence to necessarily call out this particular operator for that item. Other thoughts? Jonathan?
The you know, the concerns that the other operator brought up, maintenance. I know nothing about maintenance, parking way over by the river. That sounds like it's just so far out of our purview that, you know, we could, if we have to mention it, but yeah, it should be noted, you know, this was it was tried to, you know, it's a competitor talking shit. Like
Yeah, from my perspective, I think I agree. You know, I don't know enough about that as well personally to say that we should call it out explicitly. And, you know, similarly, I think we were just saying that in these cases, we should probably try to be as consistent as possible when calling out concerns about the location and the type of permit that we've been presented with here. Yeah, Nancy.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that compliance with other regulations that do not come under our opinion, our purview, should be left to those agencies. That's not what we're about. And I'm a little offended that a competitor would come and make comments like that, which have nothing to do with this permit. It's upsetting to me because I think it's unfair. It's the first time in my many years, more than 10 years on this committee, that I've ever heard a competitor come and make complaints like that about another operator. So I was really taken aback by that and very surprised, and it's unfortunate.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. I believe I agree as well. I think thanks for the comment, Nancy. I also agree. I think it's the first time I've ever seen that on this committee, though I think I saw it on the predecessor to SLAP in the past, PSQL, when competitors would try to come out and shut down applications for new liquor licenses because they saw competition. I agree that in this particular case, I don't think we have enough evidence to include any kind of mention of maintenance. So I would suggest that not be in the resolution, but I would suggest that we pass a resolution. I would suggest to the committee a resolution indicating that with respect to these particular locations, the DOT has recommended these locations, but that we as a committee lay out the specific concerns that were mentioned before. BJ made a motion. Would there be a second as to supporting that motion minus any mention of maintenance? Yeah, Pete.
I second.
All right. We got a motion and a second. So we'll take that resolution as laid out there to a vote. And we'll start with John.
Okay.
Nancy.
Yes.
Tristan.
Yes.
Kathy.
Yes.
Maki.
Yes.
David.
Shoot. Yes.
PJ.
Yes.
Pete.
Yes.
Janice.
Yes.
George.
Yes.
Joel.
Yes. Yes. Sorry.
Sam. Oh, thanks.
Yes.
Sam.
Yes.
And I'm a yes. Okay, so that resolution is so adopted. To the operator. As mentioned in the past, it'll go next to the full board on February 9th. at which point it'll be voted on the full board, and if that resolution is adopted, it'll of course go back to DOT at that point, and you'll be dealing with them from that point forward. We appreciate you coming in to present your request and to answer our questions this evening. All right. With that, we're going to move on to the fourth and final item on our agenda this evening, and with much appreciation to our next presenter for his patience up to this point. He's gotten to see several of the other items on our agenda this evening, but we thank him for sticking with us because we're pretty excited for this presentation. Our final item in the evening will be a presentation from Jerry Bogaz. Mr. Bogaz is an Assistant Director for Planning and Program Management at the New York Metropolitan Transportation Council. I'll just provide a little bit of context at the top, and then I'll hand things over to the presenter. For folks who are unaware, Community Board 5 has created a Community-Led Improvement Plan Task Force, or a CLIP task force, to create and provide a community plan for the Penn Station area. CB5 is on record as stating that the governor's current plan for the Penn Station neighborhood, the state's general project plan, or GPP, is fundamentally flawed. Despite being pitched as having the goal of paying for improvements to Penn Station, what the GPP contains is massive commercial skyscraper development, 10 new commercial office towers in the Penn neighborhood, the eminent domain seizure and destruction of 3 blocks in Midtown, and some extremely vague value capture and financing plans, which are theoretically going to result in a collection of Penn Station improvements that don't improve the existing platforms at Penn Station, don't prioritize or guarantee through running as a way to improve regional transit or make regional travel more efficient in the region, and this plan would require an expansion of the station to get any new capacity, as opposed to expanding the capacity of the current platforms and the current footprint. The state's GPP would also leave Madison Square Garden sitting on top of the Western Hemisphere's biggest transit hub. So CB5 is on record as saying that the GPP is flawed. CB5 definitely supports goals like radically improving Penn Station, adding capacity to Penn Station, adding development density around Penn Station, but has adopted the position formally that the state's current GPP is not the way of doing it. What CB5 has done is started our own process to develop an alternative plan that prioritizes bigger transit improvement to Penn Station, better transit oriented development around Penn Station, and a different, more reliable financing plan. This is a project that Community Board 5 is going to be doing for probably the next several years, because that's how long it takes to do a community plan that actually incorporates feedback from the community. That being the case, this CB5's CLIP task force is operating on its own. It cuts across multiple committees in Community Board 5, and it'll be operating across those committees for many months to come. What we're getting the opportunity to hear tonight is for, obviously the appropriate venue here, the Transportation and Environment Committee. We're excited to learn as a board and contribute to this process information about how infrastructure gets funded in the state of New York. And that is what Mr. Bogaz is able to educate us about a little bit tonight. So we very much appreciate that he's here, that he sat through so much of our other meeting to get to this point of the evening. Much appreciated. And with that, I'd like to turn over the floor to educate us a little bit.
Great, thank you, and good evening, everybody. I now know more about bus stops in Midtown Manhattan than I did before, so that's one effect from tonight. So again, as EJ indicated, I'm going to be talking about the process. There's a lot wrapped into everything that's happening in your community board and around various projects and plans and so forth. My purpose tonight is simply to talk about how funding happens, which I don't want to give short shrift to, but I also understand that you've been at this for close to 2 hours. And I don't know how far you want me to go into it. I'll start, and then let me know when you're exhausted. So,
I mean, I appreciate that, but believe me, we've dealt with much longer meetings in the past. I think maybe if you could, kind of aim for 15 to 20 minutes of your initial walkthrough, and then leave some time for questions afterwards. It'll let us have a good conversation.
Okay, great. So the organization, which I'll get into when I get into this, but the organization I work for specifically exists due to federal funding for transportation investments. I will be talking about funding generally, but the focus of this is going to be federal funding. Of course, there are other sources of funding besides federal. So I like to start with this figure because it really kind of summarizes how it happens across the board, not just federal. So there are 3 lines of funding in our region. There's the federal line, which begins with Congress authorizing and appropriating funding, then goes down to the states, apportioning money to the states, in this case, New York State, which then suballocates funding to metropolitan regions in the state. And then ultimately the funding gets to project sponsors to do improvements. The state also has a funding process through the New York State Legislature, which appropriates dollars, and those go directly to project sponsors. Usually that's focused on the facilities and equipment that's under the state's jurisdiction. And then finally, we have a very healthy local section here, or local sector, I should say, which includes municipalities like New York City, generate a lot of funding for transportation. Other local counties, public authorities. We have enormous public authorities and their capital budgets. And funding comes from those sources too, down to a project sponsor. So those project sponsors are the owners or operators of transportation facilities or services. So if it's a question of a roadway that's owned by New York City, then if there's an improvement project to be done on that roadway, then the city will do it. If it's eligible for federal funding could be reimbursed the costs of that project, but it still will be done by the city. Okay. Now, some of the state funding does go into the federal side because the federal side does require local match, and similarly, some of the local funding goes in here too. So usually the federal programs are 80% federal, 20% local. Many of them are overmatched to greater proportions of local money. All of them have to have this participation, with a few exceptions in the legislation. Occasionally, you'll come across a fund source that's 100% federal, but for the most part, you have to identify a local match. And there is one process that is that kind of goes around this, and that is discretionary funding. That is funding that's nationally competitive, and is the selection of the projects that are awarded is at the discretion of the U.S. Secretary of Transportation. And as you'll see, there is more discretionary funding in the current Federal Authorization Act than there's ever been before. And that's a very interesting development because it gives the U.S. DOT Secretary a lot of influence in the process. So this is, these in a nutshell, this is the federal funding picture and the state and local funding that makes up the lion's share of what happens in terms of transportation improvements in our region and in the city. So Congress funds transportation usually through multi-year authorization acts and then annual appropriations acts. That's how Congress disperses funds. The current Authorization Act, you're probably aware of, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which was signed into law in November of 2021. It reauthorized existing surface transportation programs for 5 years, starting with federal fiscal year 2022. And it also added new programs to address existing and new priorities. And there's been a bunch of rulemaking and guidance over the past year that has been in play to get to implementing all the aspects of the IIJA. The annual appropriations acts are, interestingly, they're the title, there's 12 of them actually that fund the government. The one that is transportation related is Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development, or THUD. So that's usually one of the appropriations acts that gets passed every year. Now, one thing about the IIJA is that the federal authorization is considerably more than its predecessor. So on the left, you have the FAST Act, which I don't even recall what that acronym stood for, but that was the previous authorization, and that was about $293 billion over 5 years for US DOT, which is where the federal funding would come from. The IIJA took that 293 as a baseline and then added on top of it, almost doubling it. The additional 274. So significant new funding, and you'll see that's beginning to reach down to the local level also. But needs are very, very great. And one of the things we need to do when we're considering the IIJA is also manage expectations, because there's a huge need in the country and in our region, and even additional funding at this level will be taken up pretty quickly. I'm not going to go into this in a lot of detail. There are a number of funding programs identified in the IIJA. You can see in the yellow boxes the percentage increases over the predecessor act for these fund sources. Each have different different eligibility criteria, different focus areas in terms of transportation. As you can see, there are also 4 new programs in the IIJA: carbon reduction, PROTECT, which is a really crazy acronym, but just think of it as in terms of resilience, the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program, or NEVI, and the Bridge Formula Program. So these are Title III formula funding programs, which tend to be, well, they're all administered by the Federal Highway Administration. This funding tends to be considered to be quote unquote highway funding. There is an ability to flex some of this funding for transit purposes. On the other side of the ledger is Title 49 formula funding, which is administered by the Federal Transit Administration. This is specific to transit, and there is some flexibility here also, but mostly this is used by transit because it's a smaller amount. You can see on the bottom the total authorizations are 44% higher, but it's off a smaller base. So, the relationship of Title 23 to Title 49 is still approximately 2/3 to 1/3, more funding on the Title 23 side. And there are a number of these pilot and discretionary programs, which I've organized here by topic, but there are more than a dozen of them. We're still learning about them. And our members are aggressively applying for them so that we can get some of this discretionary funding into our region also. As of now, we're approaching $600 million in awards through these programs through the first fiscal year of the IIJA. So that's an extra $500 million, and we'll be going higher than that as time goes on. So how does this translate to our region? Well, our current transportation improvement program, which is a 5-year program of transportation improvements that will receive federal funding. As you can see here, there's been a 26% increase in programmed federal funds over the previous 2, well, specifically over the previous TIP, which was fiscal 20 through 24, and a little bit more over the one that preceded that. So, that's not even the total, because the 4 new formula programs that I mentioned have yet to be programmed in the TIP. They will be added. And the majority of the awarded discretionary funding, which is listed there as $277 million, because I forgot to update the slide, but it's actually $580 million, has yet to be programmed. So that number is going to be somewhere between 15 and 20 billion when all is said and done, and that's going to be a very significant increase. It is beginning to translate down to our level, and this funding is beginning to be used here. And if we continue to aggressively pursue the discretionary funding, we can do even better than this. So the organization I work for is the New York Metropolitan Transportation Council, which enters the process right here for the New York City metropolitan region. I'll go into that a little bit just so you understand what this is and how it affects the process. So we're what's known as the Metropolitan Planning Organization, or MPO, and we cover New York City, suburban Long Island, and the lower Hudson Valley. So what is that? That's really a regional council of governments consisting of 9 voting and 7 advisory members. I work for the staff of NMTIC, but the staff of NMTIC is not the organization. The organization is the member agencies. The organization is required by federal legislation that authorizes the funding for transportation. There's over 400 councils like this in the country for the reason that it's required by the federal government. And it's responsible for the mandated metropolitan transportation planning process. So what is that? Okay. Well, first of all, let me go into the membership quickly. 5 suburban county executives, Nassau and Suffolk on Long Island, Westchester, Rockland, and Putnam to the north in the lower Hudson Valley. 2 New York City commissioners, city planning, well, actually, he's a director, and the New York City Department of Transportation, the state commissioner of transportation, and the CEO of the MTA. So those are the voting members of NMTIC. There are a number of advisory members, including the Port Authority. You might wonder why something as big as the Port Authority is the advisory member. And really, it's because they're a self-financed public authority. They use very, very little, if at all, federal funding, and they basically fund themselves. So they're an important player in the process, obviously, but they're not at the table to make decisions on how federal funding is used because they really don't use it themselves. We have 2 New Jersey agencies, New Jersey Transit and our sister MPO across the river, the NJTPA, as well as New York State's Department of Environmental Conservation, and then the 3 federal oversight agencies, Federal Highways, Federal Transit, and US EPA. So those are the 16 members of NMTIC. The 9 of them who vote, 7 of them are advisory. So this is NMTIC. You know, when you're thinking about what this organization is, we are staff to this organization. We work for these members. The members are the parties that have to effectively accomplish the planning process and make decisions on how funds are going to be used. And that planning process is laid out in federal regulation. And it starts here with a long-range regional transportation plan. It eventually goes to a transportation improvement program, which I mentioned earlier, which is usually a medium-term 5-year program of improvement projects that will receive funding, and then eventually ends up over here on the upper left with project planning and implementation. And that's not, you know, only roadway projects. That's transit equipment, it's transit facilities, it's demand management programs. It's a wide range of activities. So this shouldn't be thought of necessarily as a construction process. It is capital funding across the board for everything except aviation, essentially on airport aviation. Our current regional transportation plan is called Moving Forward. That forms the basis of the planning process. I'm going to skip over a couple of slides here because I think that the hour is late, and this is detail that, you know, it's important to the process, but it really takes away from the overall summary I'm trying to give. But we do have a plan, and we have to do a new one every 4 years. It's built around a shared vision of our members, which is important to understand. Shared vision for regional mobility, and these are the 5 goal areas they've chosen. Essentially what they're saying is, when they come together as NMTIC, what organizationally is their goal? You know, what is their shared vision for the region? They all have individual parts of the transportation system that they're responsible for and have to plan for, but they're coming together as a regional council. And when they do that, what is their vision? What are their goals? It is based on future forecasts. We have to forecast future demand. That's required. So we have a lengthy process of developing future forecasts at the regional level. It has a number of recommendations, rather, of major investments and smaller investments, vision projects that are aspirational, and also investment recommendations for human services transportation and more specialized services, and strategies and actions for short-term planning that help to guide our planning program. And we have to show that we can pay for this plan, which is a big undertaking, as you can imagine. This is a plan to pay for the plan, and it has to be essentially a long-term financial plan for the region. And that's an interesting exercise to go through. And we generate a lot of large numbers when we do that. But the federal regulations require it so that any identified improvements that are coming out of the plan have to be shown to be fit into the financial envelope that we anticipate in the long term, federal and otherwise. And it has to be, although it's chock full of all kinds of assumptions because it's long range, it still has to be reasonable and something that's acceptable to the federal agencies. And some of the numbers we're talking about are enormous. Over a period of 29 years, operations and maintenance, as you can see, almost $1 trillion. $750 billion to preserve the existing system because our system is so large, and we're talking about everything. We're talking about roads, bridges, transit facilities, transit equipment, the whole 9 yards. It's so large and it tends to be old that it costs a huge amount of anticipated resources just to preserve it, leaving about $50 billion to enhance it. Which is why our members are looking more and more for major investments to innovative new approaches to doing that and not relying so much on mainstream federal dollars. And I'm almost done. Here are some of the additional financing strategies. Actually, EJ, you mentioned one of them, value capture, public-private partnerships, debt financing, discretionary federal funding, and cordon pricing. Cordon pricing is, of course, the developing tolling schedule for the Manhattan CBD. And then quickly, that translates into a medium-term transportation improvement program, which is really where the projects crystallize in terms of schedule and scope. It's a multi-year program, and it enables the obligation of federal dollars. So the federal funding comes in as reimbursement to existing costs, and without this process that identifies the projects in this fashion from the plan to the tip, that funding would not be enabled. But following this process, we are able to enable that funding. It's usually developed every 2 to 3 years, and the funding is coming from the feds. It's a portion to the state, and then the state is making sub-allocations within the state. Some of it's keeping back for statewide purposes. Others, it's sub-allocating to metropolitan regions, and that's how it gets to our region as a series of planning targets. So the state is the fiduciary in the federal process. It plays an important role, but it's certainly not the only role. And of course, it has to be constrained. Like the plan, the tip has to be constrained. So we're identifying funding that's reasonably expected to be available, given the federal authorization and so forth. And just to give you an idea of what's in the tip, we have $36.9 billion programmed now, all sources, all fund sources. And that breaks down about 40% of that is federal, the 14.6. And of course, that percentage is going to increase over time. State and local make up 60%. So this is a highly leveraged program with state and local resources. And we have, again, an enormous source of local resources in the MTA and their ability to bond and so forth. So you can see that although the federal portion is very important, it's not the majority of the funding that comes into our region. Lots of projects, over 1,000 projects in the current tip. And you can see the numbers don't equate necessarily to the funding levels because of different sizes, but it gives you a sense of the scale of the tip. And then finally, the program formula funding in the tip is about 12.1 billion. So this is the formula funding. This isn't the formula plus the discretionary. And you can see the split here, about 67% to New York City, 20% to Long Island, 13% for the lower Hudson Valley. That roughly approximates the population split in our region, which it should. So this is the level of federal funding that's coming in by formula. The formulas are driven by, among other things, population and vehicle miles of travel and so forth. So these percentages are not surprising. We've also gotten a lot of funding for COVID relief over the course of the last 3 years. Total funding was $18.8 billion. Much of this could be used for operations. Much of this is the reason why the MTA has not had to cut its its services at this point, given its ridership shortfalls, and it also supports the other suburban bus systems that are in our region. So this has been very, very important for keeping levels of transit service at where they are, essentially. And it is going to run out at some point relatively soon. The MTA, I guess, I've heard all kinds of estimates to 2024, 2025. There'll likely not be another infusion of federal dollars. And so that is the infamous fiscal cliff that the pandemic situation is imposing on transit providers. And it's a real thing, and it's a real situation that is going to take some doing to dig out from, because it's not clear if ridership is going to approximate pre-pandemic levels at any point soon. So this again is operational funding that came in as relief funding, did come through this process. It is federal funding, and it's very, very important to our region up to this point. We do visualize our tip also. There is, if you go to our website, you can see a map. So if you are interested using this map and projects in Community Board 5, you could zoom in and take a look at where projects are programmed and so forth. And that makes it a little easier because 1,000 projects in one program is a lot to wade through. That's it. I hope that wasn't too long, given the late hour. Happy to try to answer any questions. And I hope I gave it, gave you a little bit of a sense of how this whole thing works in terms of how the sausage is made when it comes to funding of transportation and infrastructure.
No, that was great. That was fabulous. I mean, thank you for being as efficient as you were. But I obviously we could dig into a lot of detail here and
Sure.
and talk about some of these mechanisms for hours. In the interest of time, I'll immediately turn things over to other members of Community Board 5 who are either on the committee, and there are indeed other members of our community-led improvement plan in attendance as panelists tonight as well. So I'll open things up for questions. I'm going to start with one of my peer committee chairs from our Land Use, Housing, and Zoning committee, Layla Lagrizico. Layla, I want to give you the opportunity to, since you helped organize this very presentation with Jerry, wanted to give you the opportunity to chime in as well.
No, thank you so much, EJ. Jerry, we ambushed you. We're so happy that you're with us tonight. Thank you again, and thank you for your patience.
And believe me, you didn't ambush me. I've been ambushed. This was
my question is just for clarification. I have many questions. I'm going to put it out there, EJ, so I hope you will, and Jerry, I hope you will indulge. My first question is, you did not mention anything about FRA. I just want to make it clear that this is solely FTA and federal highway funding that is coming through you. And if you can just elaborate on, I mean, we know that New York is receiving FRA money. How does that compute? Is it a good relationship? Is it siloed? Do you have a sense of what's coming? Can you speak a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, and then it's the way the legislation was created that authorizes this funding. It's a different title. It doesn't have to come through this process that I described to you, the MPO process. There is a relationship to the state, obviously, and Amtrak funding is even a subset of that because I believe that's a direct infusion from Congress. I'm not even sure it comes through the FRA. It may, but we don't really deal with the FRA process at all. And there are reasons that go back to the development of this legislation at different periods of time. For example, what's now the FTA, the Urban Mass Transportation Act, was in 1964, but the initial act that created funding for highways goes back several decades before that. So that's one of the reasons Title 23 and Title 49 are not the same, and they even have slightly different process. FRA funding, I don't know enough about it, to tell you the truth, Layla.
But in terms of planning, do you take what you anticipate FRA is going to contribute into account in your planning, or is it something that you ignore entirely?
Well, we don't ignore it. We don't take the funding into account, but we watch very closely what's happening with two things: freight railroads, and the other being Amtrak. and we're paying attention to those two things, even though any funding that's undertaken on behalf of them does not come to the MPO table. But obviously we have to be aware of it, and we need to provide input when we can. The FRA does not sit on our board, as you saw, but we can communicate with them depending on the situation. So we don't ignore it, but there's little we can do about it.
Got it. Thank you. EJ, let me know how you want to proceed. I have many more questions, but I don't want to suck up all the oxygen out of here.
All right, we'll go round robin first, and then we'll come back to the rest of your questions. We've got a hand from George Hikalis.
Hello, George.
Hello again. I just very briefly again, Jerry. Nice to see you, and
good to see you too.
Presentation, and I used to work with Jerry years ago. I don't want to
many years ago
imply that he's old. I'm 87, so
Yeah.
But basically, some of the issues that we, even at the preamble of this meeting tonight, we're talking about interstate issues. New York, New Jersey, how we handle commuters from New Jersey to New York, what kinds of stations do we need to have, how many tunnels do we need? The only entity that you described that deals with this is the Port Authority, which is not a democratic organization by any means. It's controlled by two men, the governors of New York and New Jersey. It seems to me there's practically no public participation except giving the results. These are the things we've come up with. This is what you have to do. Is there any way we can use this collection of organizations to be more productive in having interstate cooperation on planning?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think, and George's past history started, or at least at some point, included something called the Tri-State Regional Planning Commission,
Yes.
which used to be a 28-county MPO covering 3 states. And it was created by a 3-state compact, and it dissolved in 1982. Into 8 other organizations. NMTIC is one of the remnants. And basically, Tri-State had responsibility for more than just transportation. It was a multifunctional commission. It dealt with federal dollars, and as George knows, it looked at planning from all kinds of different angles, including a larger regional angle. We have a memorandum of understanding with our surrounding sister organizations like the North Jersey Transportation Planning Authority to plan together. It's not the same as being one MPO though. And we try to keep ourselves focused on things like what we call boundary projects. These are projects like the Hudson Tunnel Project or the Gateway that obviously have impacts across these boundaries, these planning areas. And therefore we try to work together. So there is some influence there, George, but as you know, it's not a formal organization in the same way the Tri-State Regional Planning Commission was. And that's just the reality of our region. I think we've made improvements in how Connecticut, New Jersey, even Eastern Pennsylvania and New York State communicate with one another in terms of this larger region that's really is the metropolitan region. And that's helpful, and it has led to some positive outcomes, but it's not as formal as Tri-State. So the answer, George, is yes, but it's limited.
Thank you.
All right, great. Next up is David.
Hi, Jerry.
Hi.
I just have a question in terms of kind of the functioning of NMTIC. To what extent is NMTIC an independent planning organization that could potentially have a different view on the feasibility or proposed, design of a project versus what your component entities might think of it? So if MTA has an opinion on what Penn Station should be and what it should cost, is NMTIC in a position to say, no, we think it's a different project and has a different cost?
Well, okay, a couple of things there. First of all, we're not RPA. So, clearly we're not independent of our members. It is a regional council. It's a consensual organization, which means everyone has a vote, and the vote, any negative vote would take an action. It's like the Security Council. Any negative vote would take an action off the table. And that can often be used by the members, and has been used in the past, to influence the discussion. Now, does that mean that agencies don't do what they feel they need to do? No, not necessarily. But there have been instances. My favorite example is when they were rebuilding the Tappan Zee Bridge. What was the Tappan Zee Bridge? The 3 county executives in the Hudson Valley got together and said to the state, hey, look, if you're going to use federal funding for this, you need our votes. And we want a mass transit component, which had been planned for many years, but wasn't necessarily in the initial concept that that then Governor Cuomo had advanced for replacing the bridge. And that was a very, successful effort. And now there is a mass transit component. There's a revamped state-financed transit service across the bridge between Rockland and Westchester that replaced an older service that was less robust. So that's just an example, of something that can happen in the process. That doesn't mean it happens all the time. It doesn't mean it happens with every project, but it can happen. And essentially the members have to come to consensus on anything they want to do using federal dollars or requiring a federal sign off. So I don't know if that completely answers your question, but
yeah, I mean, it gets to it. Yeah. And do, for instance, members of Congress that are involved in, making these allocations, does your organization interface with them directly, or all of that's through your member organization?
Yeah, our members do. We can't as staff because we're almost completely federally funded. We are, except for local match. So you can't lobby Congress if you're using federal funds. It's against the law, among other things. So we can give information to our members and say, hey, here's some information, you may want to consider this. They can do whatever they please as long as they're not using federal funds to do it. That's sort of how we get at that. But because we are federally funded, we cannot at the staff level do that.
Thanks.
Sure.
All right, thanks. Next we'll go to Maki.
Thanks, EJ. I have 2 questions, and thank you so much for the presentation. It was very much appreciated, Jerry. So what I understand from that is that NMTIC integrates and ostensibly amplifies the projects that are supported by all of these funding sources, federal, state, and local.
Yes.
That being said, how dynamic can and are NMTIC's planning processes, especially as a result of state electeds' priorities shifting? And then looking bigger than that, how does NMTIC impact something that's larger than the New York, Long Island, Hudson region, for example, the Northeast megalopolis, to include everything from DC to Boston?
Right. Yes. So on the DC to Boston front, we are participants in something called the Eastern Transportation Coalition, which used to be called the I-95 Corridor Coalition. Okay. And this is really a mega regional planning process. So not only do we participate at the staff level, but our members participate, and there is no institutional structure for funding, at least for federal funding. In other words, there's no way to look at a mega region and say, hey, we ought to cut out this much money from the Authorization Act and give it to this mega region. Unfortunately, there's no way to do that under current structure, but we have tried over the years to influence that through our members in the funding bills, and so that the federal government would recognize the fact that there are larger things in the world than MPO regions. The first part of your question was, so that was the larger part.
No, thank you very much for that. Yeah. It was related to the dynamic ability of NMTIC's planning with regards to state elected and changing priorities.
Yeah, no, that can, certainly a new governor has influenced the process. Any elected official can influence the process by bringing it to the attention of the members. And sometimes you get into, there are times when the city and the state are at loggerheads, and that really leads kind of nowhere. But they all have to work it out somehow. Otherwise, they're not going to get the federal money they need because it's all consensual. So it can be very dynamic, but there's inertia in it also, and it's not another level of government. It's a regional council, And the fact that it's a consensual process means that there really are no losers ultimately. They can't really be losers at this level. But all the members have to work together, to come to a conclusion. And that can be very dynamic, and sometimes it just generates pablum, but it has had some really interesting outcomes over the years. Also, one other thing I just wanted to point out, we have this loose confederation of the MPOs and councils of government in the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Pennsylvania metropolitan region also. So we do more work within that than we do in the whole Eastern Transportation Coalition. But both of those are trying to go beyond our little planning area with 12 million people in it.
All right, not seeing other hands. It's back to Layla.
Great, thank you so much, EJ. Just to follow up on Maki's question, I was actually not familiar with the Eastern Transportation Coalition, but I'm familiar with the Northeast Corridor Commission. You do interact with them, and my understanding is that they have a planning role and that they were created by an act of Congress in 2008. How redundant are they, and how different are they from the Eastern Transportation Coalition, and what is your interaction with the NEC Commission?
That's a great question. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to fully answer it, but the commission is an organ of government, whereas the Eastern Transportation Coalition is a voluntary coalition. It's not a form of government. It's sort of, it's not quite an MPO on a large scale, but it's sort of like that. So the commission has, certain responsibilities that were set up in legislation, and it carries those responsibilities through. And that includes things, I believe it had participated in NEC Future and in some of the projects that are coming out of that. So to the extent that we are, again, monitoring what's developing in the Northeast Corridor, there could be interaction with the commission, but there's no formal interaction required.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. All right. So shifting gears a little bit, if that's okay, can you actually speak a little bit about these this formula funding and these grant applications? And am I correct in thinking that the SIG grant, CIG, I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, acronym, that's a FTA grant?
Yes,
right?
that's FTA. And so one thing is, when FTA talks about grants all the time, but they're really not grants. Everything is reimbursement, so yeah, it's a grant. It's a grant,
FRA, right? Including for FRA.
Including for FRA, yes. All federal programs are, in fact, reimbursement programs, which means that, and it makes it difficult for community groups because, or smaller entities, because you have to have money up front, and then get reimbursed for that. But you have to generate the funding in the first place, So SIG, or Capital Investment Grants, is a program of FTA, or on the FTA side of the house, and it was one of the sections in my slide that showed the federal programs under Title 49, and even that's a reimbursement program. So did I answer that part of your question, I guess?
Yeah, totally. If we take a practical example, let's say, for example, that, we need to rehabilitate Penn Station,
right?
And we assume that a SIG grant is going to be used. How would the state or the states, given that maybe it's going to be New York and New Jersey going in together, go about putting together this application for a SIG grant? And what role do you play? And if you want to take another example, we can do that so that it's less hot.
Okay, so when it comes to Penn Station, you have to start with who owns. Again, the sponsor is the key. Who owns Penn Station? Who owns the station itself? I believe that the whole thing is owned by Amtrak, right. And the Long Island Railroad may have some small ownership somewhere, but I'm not exactly sure about that.
No, they don't. New Jersey has a tiny bit. New Jersey Transit has a tiny bit of this, tiny section of the 7th Avenue and 31st. Maybe we can take another example so that it's more clear.
Sure.
We're trying to understand the grant application process.
Well, let's take say the 2nd Avenue subway.
Yeah, perfect.
The next phase, okay, which is actually coming up. So MTA would be the applicant there. They would they could either use money that comes through the formula apportionments, that is kind of constant. You know, we know what it is in advance, or they could apply for some of the discretionary funding, which is something called New Starts, which is again nationally competitive. And they've done both actually with the Second Avenue subway. So they would put the application together. They're the sponsor. They're the ones who are going to build it. You know, even though they may contract with a construction firm, and probably will, they're responsible. And you know, that they can enlist the other members of NIMTIC, particularly the city and so forth, to support that and to partner in it in many ways. But ultimately, they're the prime mover in something like the Second Avenue subway. There are other examples. Let's say Select Bus Service in New York City, which is obviously less capital intensive, but that's really a partnership between the MTA and the city DOT because it involves regulation of the streets. You know, so the city DOT has to be part of that. The subway affects the streets, but only during construction. You know, you have to have access to the subway though, and the city gets involved in that. So it's a question of bringing all this crazy quilt of jurisdictions into focus on any given project. On some, it's very complicated. On some, it's very straightforward. You know, but we have more jurisdictions per square mile in this area of the world than probably anywhere else, particularly if you add in the suburban jurisdictions, you know, so there's a lot of stuff out there.
Yeah, no, it's there's a lot of stuff and lots of people. There's lots of cooks in the kitchen. That's for sure. Right. Going back to the grant application process, what qualifies a local or state matching contribution? Does it just mean that the state says, okay, you know, we do want to spend X amount? Mm-hmm. Does the bonding have to be done, and do they need to show the money? What constitutes a state share in a grant application that would satisfy the US DOT, where the US DOT would say, okay, we will reimburse you, i.e. you're getting a grant for that particular work?
Well, the way the Fed, and again, let's just talk about the basic situation, which is 80-20, okay? So most grant programs are 80-20, which means 80% will be reimbursed. So the way the feds control that is that you spend all the money and you're going to get 80% back. You know, so there's no chance in getting 100% back or getting in more than 80% back. So you've already spent the money. That's your responsibility as the sponsor, wherever it came from. If it came from partially from the state or whatever, that's, you know, your responsibility. You're going to get 80% back. So that's sort of the way the feds control it. But the state could participate in that through appropriations from the state legislature and the the New York State DOT budget. And they don't have to necessarily cover all 20% of that. There could also be a local part of it, you know, the city or the MTA or both, you know, depending on what the project is.
Okay. But basically it's up to the state to find the money, so they can, let's say, issue bonds to the dormitory authority, pay the contractors, and then the Fed say, okay, you did indeed do X, Y, and Z. That constitute program that is eligible for this federal money. Here is your 80%.
If the state is in fact the sponsor, yes. But now you're getting into state financing methods, which is I'm less cognizant of, shall we say. So yeah, that they could float bonds or whatever they do, or they just put it in the budget. And the point is that, you know, the feds will see and have to accept that the likelihood of that match being there, the likelihood of the project sponsor being able to upfront the money is a high probability. And then they'll commit to the federal reimbursement, which is called project obligation.
Got it. So back to Penn Station. In the instance of Penn Station, we understand that for the reconstruction of Penn, the very first phase that was actually appropriated is actually a design contract for, I think, $64 million or $56 million this past summer. Is that so basic? And, you know, this will be, a tiny chunk that will apply to, what we have been told, the total price tag is $7 billion. So does it mean that for each little section, there is going to be a grant application, or do you at some point Like, does the MTA apply for, here's the project, here is 7 billion, and we're going to spend the 7 billion and then you reimburse us? Or is it like bit by bit?
Well, it could be bit by bit. But let me just point out that it's not clear what, if any, federal involvement there will be in Penn Station.
Yeah, we
It's
certainly,
completely
yeah.
not clear, and I have no information on that either, frankly. If you look at the, whatever's out in the public and the financing package, it's a public-private partnership and value capture. Is that going to be I can't answer those questions, clearly.
Yeah,
But it could,
totally,
in a complex project, you could financing a project and even developing what a project is can often be innovative and very complicated. And something like Penn Station, with the need for the Hudson Tunnel project and possibly the Gateway project, and so forth, it's probably one of the most complex arrangements you'll see in a large project like this. And it's just not clear how that's all going to play out at this point.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's only complicated. Now let's talk.
Hey, Leila, before it gets too late, I just wanted to make sure that we gave any attendees who are in attendance the ability to ask any questions as well, in case they they had questions for the presenter also. If any, no, I just want to spread the love out. If any members of the public had any questions for the presenter, go ahead and use the raise hand feature now, and we'll make sure you get the opportunity to ask those questions. I know we are down to 3 members of the public in attendance, but wanted to make sure they had that opportunity.
So I think I did you a favor, actually.
We got Joseph Clift. Joe.
Hey, hi Joe. How are you?
Let's see. Joe, you can now unmute. Joe, if you unmute now, we will hopefully be able to hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yes, we can.
Okay. Yeah. Hi, Jerry. Long time no talk.
Really, Joe?
I just want to make an observation that on the operating side, as everybody knows, the MTA is literally billions of dollars short right now from what they need from the old operating revenues. They're still way down. A lot of the sources of capital money are down, mortgage transfers and everything else. And we're planning to spend capital money like drunken sailors. And I hope in the planning, the alternate planning that Community Board 5 does, you think very seriously about the wasted money that's been proposed, not only at Penn Station, but in the Hudson Tunnel project. And I'm not sure if that's going to go through NIMTIC or the North Jersey Transportation Planning Council, which you've got the Hudson Ocean between those two. It creates a major planning challenge.
No, it's actually both, Joe. We have to both do that.
Gotcha. But I would simply say that the $16 billion to build new tunnels that will provide no additional capacity until another $15 or $20 billion spent is something that this community board would want to weigh in on. And what is it, $8 billion for Penn Station to not actually make any substantial operating improvements? These are incredible amounts of money being spent for basically very little transit, mobility improvement. And we just aren't going to have the money. And I think people need to face up to that new reality and think hard about being much better overseers of the public buck. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks for the comment. That is the only hand that I see from attendees. So we'll bring it back into the committee. We should probably time box this a little bit, Leila, because I know that we could ask questions for hours and hours, and we might have to take some of the line of questioning offline so that people can.
Yeah, I see that Jonathan has his hand up.
Yeah, Jonathan.
Hi, I just want to know, what is the, scope of the average project that you guys are contributing to? Because it's easy to say like, oh, we did we rebuilt Port Authority or something like that. But like, what is the majority of these projects that you guys are working towards?
All right, so it's over 1,000 projects in our tip. First of all, there's a vast range in that, from a couple 100,000 for an intersection that's on the national highway system to, I don't know, 12 billion for the Second Avenue subway or whatever. So there's a huge range in our tip. I would say the majority of the projects are probably less than 5 million generally. And it depends on what a project is too, because procurement of bus fleets happens at different levels. And sometimes you're procuring 100 buses, sometimes 50, depending on the size of the system. MTA procures huge numbers of buses in one procurement. So those amounts can go up and down also. It's a vast range, it really is. And the key thing that we have to look for in the process is federal eligibility. And of course, we want to work with our members to try to come up with the optimal choice of projects. But there's politics involved in that too. So, I think they all do the best they can, and they're all responding to all the things, all the pushes and pulls from the outside world.
Okay.
So I think that's the only way to characterize our tip.
Okay. Can you give us an idea of what kind of projects you guys are accomplishing too?
Actually, it's hard to recite them, but the Second Avenue subway, the entire thing has been part of the planning program since the early 90s, actually, as a 4-phase monster. And of course, we're moving into the second phase now. That's a huge example. We do have, every year we publish a list of obligated projects. We have to, and we do. Which again is visualized. So if you go on our website, I think we obligated 650 projects last year, federal fiscal year 22, and that was over about 650. Right, 650 different projects. So when we say obligated, there was a formal federal commitment made to those projects. 650 projects, about 4.5 billion, approaching 5 billion in 1 year. But you get a sense if you look at that list of what we're talking about. It's hard to characterize 650 projects actually.
Okay.
But that's what we're working through each year.
Okay, thank you.
And that's not just New York City, that's our whole planning area. So.
All right, not seeing any other questions. Leila, did you have some final questions that you wanted to kind of use to summarize here? I think a lot of these lines of questioning we may have to take offline. But
Sure.
Very much appreciate the committee who's stuck around for this long, and to Jerry for answering all of our questions.
Sure, happy to do it.
Thank you so much, Jerry. Two more questions, if that's okay. Joe's question was actually a good segue for what I wanted to inquire about. What about overcost? Does the federal government frown upon overcost, or do they basically pay 80%? As long as the state paid it, or the state local paid 100%, the feds will pick up 80%?
Well, it's not a blank check, and I go back to, I discussed fiscal constraint. That's a very big deal in terms of getting the federal commitment. And then if that project cost expands, which many of them do, then, identifying how to finance that expanded cost has to fit within fiscal constraint, So by no means is it a blank check. If you say it's going to cost $10 and it ends up costing $1,000, it's not 80% of 1,000 necessarily, but our members can choose to program federal money within fiscal constraint to fill certain gaps. But again, it's within fiscal constraint. They have to show how they're going to do it, and the federal agencies have to agree that that's viable. So yeah, we're not quite drunken sailors.
Okay.
Although I feel like being one after this is over. But that's it.
Becoming one.
So
yeah, one more, Leila. One more left.
Yeah, one more. I promise. MTA has a hearing scheduled on February 7th to actually talk about the federal grants that they're applying for. It was not lost on us that Penn Station is not part of it. What should we make of this? Why are they?
I don't know what to tell you on that. You know, I really don't know. It all depends. Again, if we go back to what we just said a little while ago, which is what's been publicly stated about the Penn Station project, you know, MTA's inclusion in that has not been evident. Okay, they obviously operate through Penn Station, and they have subways and so forth around or in the general complex. But you know, how that all is going to, it's something I really don't have an answer for. You know, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, and thank you, EJ,
Sure.
for letting me ask so many questions. Really appreciate it.
Sure.
Sure. Thanks, Leila. And thanks, Jerry, for,
Mhm.
you know, once again, for sticking with us all night, for taking your time to inform us. You know, hopefully you don't mind if our task force continues to follow up as
Not
we
at all.
have some other questions.
I spend,
'cause
you
this
know,
will-
I spend half my professional life at least explaining this whole thing, you know, and as best I can, you know. Sometimes there's no explanation for it, but so it's something we have to do, and it's not obvious. It's kind of like, you know, the Euler process in New York City or something. You have to explain it over and over again, and it's not obvious to people what actually happens. But there is a system out there, and there is accountability in the system of using federal funds. So happy to do it.
Well, we appreciate it. Our CLIP task force will try to become an expert in some of these processes, much as you learned a lot about bus stops this evening.
Yes.
Anyway, we really appreciate your time.
Sure.
Thanks very much, and I'm sure we'll be in touch to you know, tap your expertise again. So
Feel
thanks
free
so
to
much
call on
for-
me. Okay. Good night, everyone. Thank
Appreciate
you.
it. Good night. Thank you.
Thank you.
That will, yeah, thanks, Leila. That'll bring a conclusion to our agenda for the evening. I want to thank the entire committee again for you know, sticking with all the items of the agenda, but B, also kind of rolling with a little bit of a new approach to some of the requests that were coming in tonight. I think, as I said at the top, it kind of scopes our involvement a little bit more efficiently, you know, as opposed to a, you know, straight up support or deny type thing that we really don't have influence over anyway. And I think we'll continue to tweak, but I think kind of the approach that we started on some of these applications tonight potentially gives us the opportunity to focus on where our voice can actually, you know, make a difference, which is focusing on the specific concerns that we have about a particular request, and B, you know, as we get more used to it, hopefully make us a lot more efficient. It might not have felt like that tonight, but I think perhaps it is a real opportunity to focus more on the people who are coming out to talk about a particular request, laying out their concerns in a way that DOT can't ignore, and not getting distracted by trying to vote something up or vote something down. I think there's an opportunity to iterate on this process and make ourselves real efficient. So I really appreciate the involvement of the entire committee this evening. I'll ask one final thing. Anyone got any new business this evening? I see no hands. With that, we'll adjourn for the evening. Thanks so much for rolling with what's hopefully a abnormally lengthier committee meeting. And everybody have a stellar evening. We'll talk to you soon.